My world has always smelled like Julian. It's the scent of worn leather, old books, and the faint, clean trace of the soap he uses. For 16 years, that scent has been the North Star of my existence, guiding me through every room, every field, every storm we've weathered together. It's the scent of home. But lately, it's been fading. The door to his study used to swing open the moment I nuzzled it. Now, it's closed, a solid, unyielding slab of wood that holds no smell of him beyond the old ghosts on the other side. I've taken to lying outside it, my nose pressed against the crack at the bottom, breathing in the thinnest whisper of him, until my whine becomes a low, mournful keen. 3 days ago, something changed. The air around Julian turned sharp and sour with a fear I'd never smelled on him before. We had gone on a search operation in the hills, just like we'd done 100 times. I found the lost hiker, as I always do. But when I led him back to Julian, Gazelle was there. Gazelle. The name is a bitter taste in my mouth. The scent she carries is cloying and false, like a flower that's sprayed with perfume to hide the fact that it's already rotting. I've been around her enough to know she's a threat. The hair on my back raises instinctively whenever she's near. I've tried to warn Julian, placing myself between them, letting out low, guttural growls that start deep in my chest. He always scolds me, his voice a calm but firm command. Sylvia, enough. But he should know. He taught me to read the world through my nose. Why can't he see what I smell on her? Tonight, the door to his study finally opened. My tail began a frantic, hopeful wag. But the look on his face was wrong. He didn't reach down to scratch behind my ears, his usual greeting. Instead, he just stood there, looking down at me with those dark, unreadable eyes. The fear scent on him was so thick it was almost visible, mixing with a deep, old sadness. He knelt down. I immediately pressed my head against his chest, desperate for contact. His hands trembled as they cupped my face. Sylvia, he said, his voice rough. I'm so sorry. What for? My tail wagged harder, trying to reassure him. He reached behind my neck. The familiar, comforting weight of my working dog collar was unsnapped and removed. It was a simple leather collar with a metal ID tag that declared me a certified search and rescue dog. It was our symbol. It meant I was his partner. The world felt off balance. He replaced it with a different one. This new collar was thinner, lighter, and it smelled new and impersonal. It was a simple dog collar, a symbol of being just a pet. I shook my head, pawing at the new collar, trying to get it off. A sharp, panicked whine escaped my throat. What are you doing, Julian? Sure, he hushed me, his hand stroking my head. It's the only way. He looked over my shoulder, and I followed his gaze. The scent of Gazelle's perfume was wafting in from the hallway, growing stronger. She was watching from the shadows. The primal part of my brain, the part that had protected Julian for 16 years, screamed a silent warning. She's here. She's the cause of this. I bristled, a low snarl curling my lips. Sylvia, stay. Julian's command was sharp, cutting through the tension. It was the first time he had ever used that tone with me in the context of Gazelle. I stopped, but my body was still rigid. Julian stood up and walked away, closing the door of my room behind him. I was locked in. The last thing I saw before the door clicked shut was his back, his shoulders set in a line of stone. And on the other side of the door, I heard her voice, a smug, silken purr. It's for the best, Julian. We can't have a liability in the program. The board is watching your every move. My world shrank to the 4 walls of that room. The scent of Julian was fading, replaced by the stale air of confinement. I lay down, my head on my paws, and stared at the door. Why? Why are you doing this? I don't understand. I've only ever tried to protect you. I've only ever been yours. The next few days were a blur of confusion and isolation. I was no longer allowed in the main building. I was fed at different times by different people. Ian, Julian's assistant, who used to give me treats but now wouldn't even meet my eyes. The scent of Julian was a faint, distant memory, like a pleasant dream I couldn't quite grasp. Then she came, Gazelle. She arrived with a sleek, arrogant Doberman named Maximum. He was a show dog, all polish and no substance, smelling of expensive shampoo and anxiety. The moment he entered my kennel area, I knew what he was. A puppet. A weapon. But Julian was with her. He stood behind her like a silent sentinel, his face a mask of stone. The sight of him ignited a spark of hope. I rushed to the front of my enclosure, tail wagging, letting out a series of happy yelps. "You came back. You're going to take me home." He flinched at the sound of my voice, the only crack in his facade. Gazelle, however, smiled. It was a terrible smile, one that didn't reach her cold eyes. "See, excitable, neurotic, unstable," she said, gesturing toward me with a manicured hand. "After the incident with the hiker in the hills, the committee feels she's a risk. A liability." "What incident?" I had found the hiker perfectly. He was scared and lost, but I'd stayed with him, keeping him calm. Nothing went wrong. The two humans who came with her, wearing the sterile white coats of evaluators, stepped forward. They held clipboards and made notes, watching my behavior with clinical detachment. I looked to Julian, waiting for him to speak up, to defend me. He only stared at the floor. The lead evaluator approached my kennel. "The report indicates aggression," she said, her voice neutral and cold. It was a lie. I had never been aggressive. I growled at Gazelle, but that wasn't aggression. That was a warning. I was trying to protect Julian. They took me out to a large, unfamiliar yard. They showed me scents I didn't know, asked me to follow commands. But every move I made was wrong. When I found the scent, they said I was too slow. When I hesitated, they said I was confused. They were not testing me. They were building a case against me. My eyes were fixed on Julian the entire time. I was waiting for him to step in, to say the one word that would make it all stop. The word he always used, "good girl." He never said it. He just stood there, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. When the testing was over, the evaluator declared her verdict. The animal is uncooperative and shows signs of deep-seated psychological stress. We recommend immediate disqualification for service and a review for suitability as a companion animal. The words were like a slap. A review. For me. I was a search and rescue dog. I had 100 successful rescues under my belt. I saved lives. And they were taking it all away. Gazelle clapped her hands softly, a triumphant smile on her face. "Well, Julian, I think that settles it. Now, about the funding for the center. That was it. The truth snapped into place with the force of a bite. It wasn't about me. It was about the money. Gazelle, with her family's wealth and influence, had the power to take away everything Julian had built. And she was using me as leverage. I couldn't accept it. I had to make him see. The instinct to protect and to be with my human was a fire inside me, more powerful than any fear. That night, I managed to escape my enclosure. The lock was old, and I'd been trained to navigate obstacles far more complex than a simple latch. I followed the fading trail of Julian's scent through the dark, silent buildings of the center. I found him in his study, the door slightly ajar. Inside, I could hear two voices. His, low and strained, and hers, smooth and venomous. "The board meeting is next week," Gazelle was saying. "Once they see the behavioral report on your primary K9, they will have no choice but to review your tenure as director. The report is fabricated." Julian's voice was tight with anger. "Sylvia is the best dog I've ever had. She saved more lives than anyone in this program. Which makes her all the more tragic a story, doesn't it?" Gazelle laughed. "A brilliant dog, brought low by a negligent handler. It will be a shame when they revoke your certification, Julian. You'll have to start from scratch. Without the center, without the funding, without," there was a pause, a predatory silence me. "Of course, if you were to agree to my terms, all of this could be avoided." "What are your terms?" "It's simple. I want you to let me handle the Sylvia situation. I'll have her placed in a suitable home. Away from here. Away from you. And in return, Sutton Holdings will provide the center with the necessary funding. Indefinitely." The word placed was a knife in my heart. Suitable home. I only had one home, and it was with Julian. There was a long silence. I could hear Julian's breathing, ragged and heavy. Fine, he finally said, the word so quiet it was almost inaudible. Do what you want. Just keep your promise. Leave the center alone. The world tilted. No, no, Julian, no. I couldn't hold back any longer. I pushed the door open, letting it slam against the wall. Gazelle let out a small scream, jumping back. Julian turned, and the look of raw anguish on his face made my heart twist. I didn't care. I didn't care about the rules anymore. I lunged forward, not at Gazelle, but at Julian. I needed to be close to him. I needed to press my nose against his hand and force him to remember everything we'd been through. The scent of rain on the Search Hills. The warmth of his body against mine on cold nights in the tent. The soft, rare laugh he'd let out when I'd done something silly. Remember me, Julian. Remember us. But Gazelle recovered quickly. You see, this is what I'm talking about, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. She's completely unstable. She's dangerous. No, I barked, the sound a sharp, desperate command. I'm not dangerous. I'm trying to warn you. Sylvia. Down. Julian's command was sharp, sharp enough to cut through the frenzy. It was the first time he'd given me a direct order in days. I froze, my body vibrating with tension. I was standing on his desk, my paws on his shoulders, my face inches from his. The scent of him was so strong, so familiar. But his eyes, they were different. They were haunted and full of a pain that was not my own. Sylvia, he repeated, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. I'm sorry. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't a game. He wasn't angry at me. He was afraid. Afraid for me. Gazelle's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and smiled. Ah, our witnesses are here. Ian, would you be a dear and show the committee in? The door opened, and Ian walked in with the same two people in white coats. Excellent timing, Gazelle said, her composure fully restored. As you can see, this animal has breached containment and is displaying severe aggressive tendencies. It's a miracle she hasn't hurt anyone. The evaluators looked at me, their expressions grim. Now, Gazelle said, her voice crisp. Let's proceed with the final steps of the behavioral review. Ian, if you will. Ian pulled out a silver muzzle. The sight of it sent a cold jolt of terror through me. I'd never been muzzled. It was a tool for untrained, dangerous dogs. Not for me. Sylvia, Julian warned, his voice a silent plea. Please, stay calm. The muzzle was cold and cruel on my snout. It was the ultimate humiliation, the tangible symbol of my fall from grace. They were erasing the dog I was and replacing her with a monster they could control. I was led away, out of the study I loved, out of the building that held the echoes of our life together. Julian followed. He didn't walk with Gazelle. He kept his distance, a shadow in the periphery of my vision. We stopped at the front gate. The same gate I'd walked through a million times, eager for the next adventure. Ian unlatched the gate. My ears perked up. Is this it? Is this our freedom? A new mission? But the car waiting outside was unfamiliar. It wasn't Julian's Jeep. It was a pristine, white van that smelled of antiseptic and fear. Gazelle walked past Julian and reached the van first. The center in Green Valley is expecting her, she said, not looking at me. They specialize in recalcitrant animals. Recalcitrant. The word was a label, a punishment. Julian stepped forward. Wait, he said, his voice cutting through the air. I want to say goodbye. Gazelle rolled her eyes but didn't stop him. Julian knelt down in front of me. His hands were shaking as he gently removed the muzzle. The relief was immediate, but it was short-lived. I whimpered, pressing my head against his chest. Sylvia, he said, his voice cracking. I'm so sorry. He took a deep breath, and I saw a single tear escape down his cheek. I should have been stronger. He reached into his pocket and pulled out my old working dog collar, the one I'd worn for 16 years. The metal tag glinted in the streetlight. I don't even know if this is a comfort anymore, he said, his voice barely a whisper. He fastened the old collar around my neck. The familiar weight settled, a ghost of what we once were. I will come back for you, he said, his voice suddenly fierce, his eyes meeting mine. I swear, Sylvia, I will find a way. Gazelle cleared her throat impatiently. It's time, Julian, she said. He stood up, his hand lingering on my head for a moment longer. Remember what I taught you, he said, looking me directly in the eyes. Use your nose and trust your instincts. He squeezed his eyes shut, and a wave of pain washed over his face. I have to go now. He turned away from me. The word died on his lips. He gave Ian a curt nod and walked back into the center, his figure growing smaller and smaller. The door of the van slid open. Ian gently, but firmly, guided me inside. The door closed with a hollow thud. The world went dark and quiet, filled only with the engine's rumble and the scent of my own fear and the fading ghost of him. I lay down, my nose pressed to the cold floor, trying to hold onto the last trace of his scent. He said he'd come back for me, but the scent of Gazelle's perfume was still on him, and it was a lie. It was all a lie. The Green Valley Center was a prison. It smelled of stale food, disinfectant, and the palpable hopelessness of 100 other animals, all deemed recalcitrant, all awaiting the same fate. I was placed in a concrete pen. There was a wooden bed, but no blanket. A bowl for water, but it was always stale. I didn't touch the food they gave me. What was the point? Eating was a gesture of life, and the life I'd known was gone. I didn't bark. I didn't play. I didn't interact with the other dogs. I just watched the gate. Every day, I stood on my hind legs, my paws resting on the high fence, my eyes fixed on the vehicle entrance. Every time I heard an engine, my heart would leap. Every time a new human approached my pen, I would search their face, hoping for the familiar, comforting scent of him. It never came. They tried to take my old collar. A man in a uniform came with a metal tool, ready to cut it off. I bared my teeth, a deep, primal growl erupting from my chest. I had never snapped at a human before. Not once. But I would not let them take the last piece of him away. He saw the fire in my eyes and backed away, muttering about a vicious dog. Days turned into weeks. The light of hope in me began to dim. The weight of the old collar was the only thing tethering me to the memory of who I was. I was a shadow of the dog I used to be. One day, a different woman came to my pen. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She was wearing a worn-out jacket and carried a sandwich in her hand. She looked at me with kind, but sad eyes. Hey, girl, she said softly. I'm not supposed to do this. They keep saying you're unadoptable, aggressive. She pushed a piece of bread through the chain-link fence. But I see you. You're just waiting, aren't you? I flinched at the word waiting. It was exactly what I was doing. Waiting for a miracle. She sat down on the ground, ignoring the dirt. I worked at the Kingsley Center a few years back. It was the best job I ever had. She sighed. It was different then. Mr. Kingsley, he was a good man. But the Suttons, they're vultures. She spoke to me for a long time, and I listened, my ears flat against my head. She told me about Gazelle's plans for the center, about how she was slowly dismantling everything Julian had built, piece by piece. She told me about the meeting next week. A big meeting. A partnership signing with the Sutton Group. The whole thing was a show, she said. A way for Gazelle to finally put her claim on Julian and on the center. A show. A performance. An idea, sharp and clear, cut through the fog of despair in my mind. It was the only thing left to me. The only way to fight back. I had to get to that meeting. The evening of the signing ceremony was crisp and cold. The center was lit up like a fortress. All glittering lights and the scent of expensive perfume and champagne. I had been watching the gate. The woman in the worn-out jacket, my only friend, had left it unlocked. A quiet act of rebellion. The moment the night shift guard was distracted, I nudged the gate open and slipped out. I followed the scent of Gazelle's cloying perfume, a foul trail that led me toward the main building's grand hall. I was older now, my muzzle graying, my joints aching. But the 16 years of training were ingrained in my bones. I knew how to move unseen. I knew how to track. I slipped through the side entrance, a maintenance door that was carelessly left ajar. The sounds of the party washed over me. Laughter, clinking glasses, and the hollow, tinny sound of speeches. I could hear Julian's voice. It was flat, devoid of emotion. My ears perked up, and I moved closer, keeping to the shadows. I crept through a back corridor, my nose to the ground. Suddenly, a scent overpowered the perfume and the champagne. It was the scent of the sedative I remembered from the night Julian's fear scent had spiked. The night everything began. It was sharp, chemical, and bitter. And it was coming from a small room near the main hall. I pushed the door open with my nose. The room was Gazelle's temporary office. A small closet, really. On the desk lay a small, unlabeled bottle, the source of the scent. My nose told me the truth. The bottle was covered in her scent and a faint trace of Julian's, meaning he had been near it. He had been exposed to it. The night she said he lost control. It was all a lie. Gazelle's own words to the woman who worked here echoed in my memory. The animal is a liability. She wasn't the liability. Gazelle was. I picked up the bottle in my mouth. The bitter taste of the chemical on the glass was a sharp reminder of the truth. It was all I had. My proof. My weapon. I walked out of the room and headed for the main hall. The music grew louder. The lights were blinding. The room was full of people, all facing the stage. On the stage, Julian stood beside Gazelle, who was beaming at the crowd. A large, ornate banner hung above them, the Kingsley-Sutton Partnership. A new era. A human stepped in front of me, blocking my path. It was Ian. "Sylvia," he said, his voice a nervous whisper. "You can't be here." I looked up at him, a low growl rumbling in my chest. He had been the one to drive me away. He was complicit. I didn't attack. I just didn't move. My eyes were locked on the stage. My message was clear. Let me pass. "Sylvia." He started, his hand reaching out to grab my collar. The touch on my collar, on the old leather symbol of my bond with Julian, ignited the last ember of fire in me. It wasn't an act of violence. It was an act of purpose. I twisted away from his hand, my body low to the ground. He reached for me again, but I was faster. I shot past him, a blur of old, dusty fur. The crowd gasped as I burst into the ballroom. Gazelle's voice faltered on the microphone. Everyone turned to look at the dog in the doorway. A mangy, scarred, old German shepherd, standing with her head held high. Then, everything fell away. I saw him. Julian, standing in a black suit, looking tired and empty. He hadn't shaved in days. The scent of his sadness washed over me, but it was tinged with something else. Relief. I ran. Not towards Gazelle. Not towards the crowd. I ran towards Julian. He was standing in the spotlight, and the people parted like waves before me. The distance was 100 feet, then 50, then 20. I could hear her screaming, "Get that animal away! Someone, stop it!" But I couldn't stop. I leaped up onto the stage, my body landing with a heavy thud. The scent of the center, of Julian, of the past 16 years, was a warm blanket around me. Gazelle stumbled backward, her face a mask of shock and fury. "Get away! Get her away from me!" I stopped directly in front of Julian. He looked down at me, his eyes wide. I looked up at him, and then, with a slow, deliberate motion, I lowered my head. I gently placed the small, unlabeled bottle at his feet. Then, I sat down, my eyes never leaving his. The crowd was silent, 100 camera phones capturing the moment. I didn't whine. I didn't bark. I just sat there, waiting for his judgment. My heart was pounding so hard I could hardly breathe. I was waiting for a command I knew he might not give. He might send me away again, but I trusted him. He looked at the bottle on the ground. He bent down, his hands trembling, and picked it up. He brought it to his nose, and I saw the instant he recognized it. The color drained from his face. The pieces of the puzzle he'd been trying to solve for weeks clicked into place. "The sedative," he whispered, the word barely audible, but loud enough for the microphone to pick it up. He looked at Gazelle, his face a thundercloud of fury. Where did you get this, Gazelle? The color drained from Gazelle's face. It's just an old bottle. An antique. The dog's lost her mind. She's dangerous. But I didn't move. I didn't growl. I just kept my eyes on Julian, silently urging him. Trust me. Another scent wafted from the bottle. It was a faint, sickly sweet undertone I knew all too well. Gazelle's signature scent, stronger than Julian's on the glass. He saw it. The recognition of the scent. The final piece of the puzzle. The person in the crowd. The woman in the worn jacket. Stepped forward. Mr. Kingsley, that's the sedative Gazelle used to spike your drink at the banquet. The same night she set everything in motion. It was her plan, sir. She made a recording of her confession. I heard it. The crowd erupted. Gazelle was backing away from the microphone, a snarl of pure rage and frustration on her face. This is all a lie. She's lying. But Julian wasn't listening to her anymore. He was looking down at me. He knelt down in front of me, his hands cupping my face. The agony in his eyes was gone, replaced by a flood of tears. He was crying, his face crumpled in relief, in sorrow, in joy. Sylvia, he whispered, his voice breaking. Sylvia, you came back. You saved me. He pulled me into a tight embrace, burying his face in the thick fur of my neck. I pressed my wet nose against his ear, and the scent of him, the real scent of him, clean and familiar, filled my senses. I was home. Good girl, he said, the words a sob. You're the best girl. I'm never letting you go again. He reached down and, with a trembling hand, unpinned the thin, worthless collar Gazelle had made them put on me. It fell to the floor, a broken symbol of a lie. Then, he pulled out my old working dog collar from his pocket. The one he'd put on me that night by the van. He fastened it around my neck. The simple, familiar weight settled onto my shoulders. The metal tag clinked softly against his hands. I saw my name inscribed on it. The same one he gave me 16 years ago. Sylvia. Search and rescue. Partner. He leaned his forehead against mine, his hot tears dripping onto my fur. I knew you'd wait, he whispered. I knew you were smart enough to find your way back. Just like you always do. I'm so sorry it took me so long to see the truth. I'm so sorry, Sylvia. A long, slow sigh escaped my lungs, the weariness of the past weeks finally released. I nuzzled deeper into his embrace, the ghost of a grateful lick on his cheek. He looked at me, a smile on his tear-streaked face. All right, partner, he said, his voice strong and clear. Let's go home.